Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a belated Frontline update for the 17th of March 2023. Before we get to the front lines, I just want to talk a little bit about a few points brought up by the ISW, an American military think tank, concerning, well, to begin with, Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's claimed that he's received a press question exposing a plot spearheaded by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev to undermine and neutralize the Wagner Group. Now, there's been a spat between the MOD and Prigozhin and the Wagner PMC, although Putin seems to have been pretty much on side with Prigozhin. In fact, arguably, he's got a lot of time for Prigozhin. So there's this interesting dynamic going on. Well, this could be putting a wedge between Putin and Prigozhin. So Prigozhin's press service published a claimed request for a comment on March the 16th from Russian outlet Nezavisimaya Gazeta, asking if Prigozhin was aware of alleged discussions between Putin and Patrushev regarding the future of the Wagner Group. The press comment claims that information on these discussions has recently circulated on Russian and Ukrainian Telegram channels and alleges that Patrushev suggested to Putin that there will be, quote, nothing left of Wagner in, quote, 1.5 to 2 months. The post, and this of course then fits in with the claims about Wagner losing an awful lot of troops. The post goes on to claim that Patrushev suggested that upon Wagner's destruction in Ukraine, Prigozhin will try to, quote, unite the former and remaining active Wagner fighters under a far-fetched pretext, arm them and send them to the territory of Russia in order to seize power in the regions bordering Ukraine and a possible advance inland. This is the idea that Prigozhin is possibly thinking of some kind of civil war activity after Wagner sort of collapses on the front lines of Ukraine. The post concludes that Patrushev has already ordered observation and control over the movement of former Wagner fighters, and that Putin already reportedly agreed with this step and thanked Patrushev for his efforts to, quote, neutralize Wagner in general and Yevgeny Prigozhin in particular. So whether that's true or not, this is going to be certainly putting a cat amongst the pigeons in terms of all of these players in the Russian military context. A little bit further on, the ISW says Russia's redeployment of elements of its peacekeeping force from Nagorno-Karabakh to Ukraine is eroding Russia's influence with Armenia. This is exactly what I talked about recently, which is now's the time for opportunistic, I don't know, I guess, discontent in some of these South Caucasus regions, countries. So this is Armenia, Azerbaijan. They had a little pop at each other previously at one point earlier in the war, but with the idea that Russia has really left only a skeleton force to keep the peace in along the border there, the historical animosity between these two nations, it might well come to the boil. Indeed, looks to be coming to the boil again, as that peacekeeping force just is not there. So there seems to be an uptick in violence on the borders between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Russian President Putin attempted to reassure the Russian public that the war in Ukraine will not have significant long-term economic consequences, likely as part of Kremlin's effort to prepare Russians for a protracted war. So it's like, methinks the lady doth protest too much. Goodness me, God, words, I struggle sometimes. Anyway, Putin is very good at laying out. They throw so many things into the information space that you're not quite sure what to believe in the Russian public, and then the Russian nation comes and kind of saves the day and cuts through the mire. But also, it's about putting things out there to set the scene for what might come as well. In this case, it's like, talking about how there won't be these long-term economic consequences to a protracted war, which is to say there's going to be a protracted war, and just letting the kind of Russian public get used to that idea. Okay, as we go to the front lines, we'll go straight to the northeast sector, the axis from Kupiansk down to Svatva to Kremna. Really not very much information at all coming out of that front. Just the usual kind of activity around Hranikivka. As you see, all of these names mentioned, it's just repelled attacks, conducted unsuccessful offensive operations, Hranikivka, Kremna, Kuzmina, Bilorivka, so that's in a forest near Dubrova, Verkhnokhomenyantsky, Spirna, so on and so forth. Blown up Ukrainian NTLB vehicle west of Chervonopipivka, and so on and so forth. So not too much to report. There is a little bit of map change, as according to Suryak Maps, a pro-Russian mapper says as basically Russians have pushed up to the Donetsk Oblast, but interestingly says that the Ukrainian army is building a defensive line on the western shores of the Kherevets River here, and indicates that the Ukrainians are doing what the Russians have done, which are building trench networks and building defensive lines in the event of a large Russian offensive, this kind of offensive that we never quite seen yet. Anyway, a bit of readjusting of the map in this kind of area there. It goes straight up the border now. It was a little bit back here, just a few fields, basically from Chervonopipivka down to this salient towards Yampolivka and Terny here. There's a tiny bit of gained land for the Russians just northwest of Dubrova, and there was sort of reference to attacks around there, but it's nothing particularly earth-shattering. Just a few fields again. Heavy fighting will be taking place. Well, I don't know if it is actually any heavier than we've seen previously. Possibly lighter fighting taking place up and down the lines, but the usual places: Bilorivka. We've got Spirna, Verkhnokhomenyansk, which is this one to the ending in E, to the west of the front line there, Spirna. And then we get down to Bakhmut and the general area around there. Even Rebar says very little about the Kupiansk down to Svatov and Kremlin front line. Just that there are the forces are building up defensively around there, not too much offensive work. Anyway, this is always good to get a bit of Evil Gherkin, giving his opinion on what's going on around Bakhmut. Extremely slow advancing the Russian forces around there. Regarding the situation on the front, heavy fighting continues in the area north of Avdiivka. We'll get to that. My sources do not confirm the capture of Krasnohorivka, although I would say that it has been captured according to their intel. The village still remains in the hands of the armed forces of Ukraine. Nova Bakhmutivka has changed hands twice. It is now ours. Liberation of Kamienka is confirmed. On the Bakhmut front, heavy street fighting within the city and very slow advance to our units. To the north, liberation of the village of Zalizhnanske. I don't know the different spellings of these. In the Kramatorsk direction was confirmed the day before yesterday. There were no cardinal changes in the general situation. Wagner and the Russian armed forces are trying to squeeze at least something until April, while respected Kyiv partners resist and do not allow the Russian great commanders Gerasimov and Prigozhin to report as soon as possible about even the most insignificant victories. Losses on both sides are high. So that's not the newest evaluation, but it's just to let you know that he's saying, hey, not an awful lot has happened. So let's have a look at some of the sources. No reports. I forgot to tell you what it said about Kremlin. Just a little bit of Russian troops tried to break through there, while Ukrainian troops launched local counterattacks to drive back the Russians. And then that destroyed vehicle I mentioned to you was just northwest of Dubrova there, but I actually have the advance slightly further to the west than he does there. But anyway, we're not talking about that. We are talking about Bakhmut. So let's get on to Bakhmut. So here we go. To the front in the south, so he starts with the south of Bakhmut. Fighting is reported close to the MiG-17 monument. That's the one that got blown up. The road 00506 from Bakhmut that leads through Kromova is also under pressure. Russian troops have moved closer there after being expelled earlier. So there were counterattacks near Kromova, which is around here, that pushed the Russians back, but now they have gained. He has them gaining territory there. That's territory I already have them under. In fact, I've got them controlling territory all around here. So he's slightly more positive, I think, for the Ukrainians. He says, north of Bakhmut, there are no changes today. Russian troops make attempts to control Orikovo, Vasilivka, so far unsuccessful. The Ukrainians repelled attacks in the areas of Orikovo, Vasilivka, Hrivka, Novomakova, and Vasyukivka and Zalizhnyansky. So there we go. Zalizhnyansky is under the control of the Russians, but it's pushing up the road towards Minkivka, and also towards the what looks like the canal still going up there. Um, but not much gain. Well, is no gain according to him. Syriac Maps does have some Russian gains in the area, so they say just around here, just a few fields, basically north of Kromova towards just north of Bodanivka. So I have represented that on mine, just taking control of parts of the hill, literally just fields around there. But other than that, it's quite a quiet day in Bakhmut comparatively compared to what it has been recently, where Russia have been making steady advances. ISW continuing to make claims about potential culmination of the Russian troops around Bakhmut. Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson Colonel Serhiy Trevati noted that Russian forces have conducted 42 ground attacks in the area over the last day. The relatively slower pace of Russian attacks on and around Bakhmut on March 16th, coupled with relatively fewer Russian claims on the advances in this area, supports ISW's assessment from yesterday that the Wagner Group offensive in Bakhmut is likely nearing culmination. However, there are some slight advantages. Advances. Sorry, geolocated images additionally confirm Wagner Group financier Prigozhin's claim that Wagner captured Zalizhnyansky, which I said yesterday. Geolocated combat footage posted on March 16th confirms that Russian forces have additionally made marginal advances near Kurdyamivka. I'll show you that in a second. Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley noted that Russian forces may be making small tactical gains in Bakhmut, but they come at high manpower and equipment cost. And this is, of course, the entire raison d'etre for continuing to defend Bakhmut. Is the cost to the Russians. So minor gains around the northwest. No talk about really what's going inside. Just continued fighting in the Azom steelworks in the metal plant, but no explicit details and no more details about these advances that were quite considerable yesterday in the southern districts of Bakhmut. Slight advance for the Russians just around here, around Kurdyamivka. This followed the canal, and now they have some of this ground just to the west of the canal, that kind of triangle there. That's literally what the ISW is referring to, and that's reflected on deep state maps as well. I've got that on my map. So there's a few gains, but it really is quite a steady day compared to what it has been. Defmon chips in with the AFU have managed to slow down the Russian offensive in almost a standstill. Russians are, however, making small gains every now and then. Goes on to talk about Zalizhnyansky, that small hamlet to the northwest of Bakhmut. After weeks of fighting, Russian forces managed to capture both farms in Zalizhnyansky. So he's obviously being a little bit facetious there. However, it is still a gain, and there are, as I mentioned yesterday, no real settlements between there and sort of 5 kilometers away. So it is. Look at that, Fedorivka, Fedorivka, Druha, and Fedorivka. Sorry, I thought there was going to be 2 Fedorivkas there. I was going to have another rant. So marginal gains in the northwest, as reported by Defmon, but nothing too significant, and those are the sort of 2 farms that represent Zalizhnyansky. Anyway, that's broadly Bakhmut. That's the quickest summary of Bakhmut I think I've given. So we'll move on. As we come out of Bakhmut, we will come down further down south along the front line towards Avdiivka and the north of Avdiivka. Avdiivka seems to be taking up almost as much. Well, today it's more news than Bakhmut. There's more movement here, and it's worrisome movement if you are pro-Ukrainian. So, what has happened north of Avdiivka? Although Rebar doesn't mention Avdiivka today on Telegram or indeed Twitter, Rebar, the pro-Russian source, did mention a fair amount about Bakhmut, but nothing that I haven't told you today already. But ISW here, I think, is referring to Rebar when it says Russian sources claim that Russian forces completely captured Krasnohorivka and that this has worsened the situation for the Ukrainian grouping in Avdiivka. And there are quite a few claims about what's going on around Krasnohorivka. I think do we have any claims in Syriac maps No, yes, we do. So this is just from an hour ago, actually. Just a few more fields gained to the west of Krasnoyarivka. The Syriac Maps pro-Russian source says the Russian army and DPR forces took control over parts of the hill which overlooks the railway adjacent to Stepova. The ISW doesn't say too much else other than there are unsuccessful offensive operations around Avdiivka, Kamyanka, Stepova, Severny, and Nevelska, Naitovlova, Pervomaisky, and so on and so forth. Pisky Vodjani, Pervomaisky as well. I've not seen that place mentioned. She's Natalova, but essentially you have which is over here just to the west of Pervomaisky. So I don't know whether that indicates that the Russians are somehow moving past Pervomaisky, maybe to the north or through it to attack towards there. But again, it could be towards that direction. Well, yep, it doesn't mean they're in there. But Stepavod's up here, so Krasnoyarivka. If they take Stepova, then they are interdicting some main supply routes coming into Avdiivka, and that is a bit of a worry for the Ukrainians. There is activity going on all around, as I've said, Krasnoyarivka, Kamyanka, Opitny, Vodyanye, and Nevelsky, and Pervomaisky. So quite a difficult situation in Avdiivka. Not too much explicit information other than from Syriac maps on a couple of fields there. Defmon says the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area in all those areas. The attack in the Stepova direction is confirmation of Krasnoyarivka being captured by the Russians. So the fact that the Ukrainians are saying that they have repelled attacks in the direction of Stepova means that the Russians are in Krasnoyarivka in order to attack towards Stepova. So I think that is pretty much the admission that Krasnoyarivka is under their control. No Reports says near Avdiivka, Krasnoyarivka is contested again. Today, the AFU General Staff said that it repelled an attack in the area of Stepova, or Stepova, making Russian presence in Krasnoyarivka likely. Still waiting for visual confirmation. The Ukrainians also repelled attacks on Nevelska, which is down there, and Severny, which is towards Avdiivka, or towards the southwest of Avdiivka. And there's proof that they're talking about attacks towards Stepova. Okay. As we come out of Avdiivka, we move on to Mariupol, which the ISW only pays a little bit of attention to. Says one Russian source claimed that Russian forces in Mariupol are anticipating a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the village and are in a constant state of readiness. That's not an unusual sort of claim to be heard. We hear about the Russians apparently anticipating Ukrainian counterattacks all up and down the front. I don't know that Mariupol would be a particularly sensible place for the Ukrainians to launch a counter offensive, but counterattack maybe. But I again, that would be quite an attritional counter attack to do around there. So it could just be filling the information space with stuff. And then we come on to Vuhledar. So Russian ground forces continued limited ground attacks in western Donetsk. Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian troops conducted unsuccessful offensives near Vuhledar. Russian forces are preparing to resume wider offensive operations on Vuhledar. ISW has previously reported on the very degraded state of Russian forces operating there, and it is highly unlikely that damaged naval infantry and Eastern Military District elements currently deployed to western Donetsk Oblast will be able to resume successful offensive operations here in the near future. And the Russian MD claimed on March 16th that a Russian Orlan 10 drone detected and destroyed a Ukrainian platoon as it redeployed into the Prechestivka area just west of Vuhledar. So claim that, and as we come down to Vuhledar here, just around here somewhere, that a Ukrainian platoon was taken out. That's according to the Russian MOD. But other than that, usuals going on in Vuhledar. I do have some visual imagery of Vuhledar to give you a sense of what's going on there, which I like to do every so often. Puts a picture in your mind of these sort of places. So this is Vuhledar, except without the music. As you can see, it's pretty destroyed, although some of the buildings, some of the large apartment blocks really have withstood an awful lot of battering and are still standing, which allows the Ukrainians to still present quite a defense of Vuhledar from on high. So very useful for them. So I think it's a really difficult place for the Russians to successfully overrun, um, given the amount of cover that the Ukrainians can get with these big apartment blocks. Maybe this gives you an idea of just what liberation looks like. Wonderful, isn't it? Wonderful what liberation can do to places that used to be bustling, teeming with life. But yes, there you go. And man with beard. Of course, as I've said many a time, Ukrainians should win the war on beards alone. Um, and that's the Vuhledar. Again, not too much explicit information about there. When we sort of zoom out and come along to the west towards Zaporizhzhia, there is actually a fair amount of activity going on in Zaporizhzhia towards Polhi there and south of Orkhiv there. So let's have a look at, well, first of all, Rebar on Telegram says, in the Zaporizhzhia direction, there's an increase in the intensity of combat operations along the entire front line. Despite the failures of the first day, the Ukrainian command continues to conduct sorties in various areas. There's a question as to whether these really are reconnaissance in force operations to shape or not shape, but to recon the front line prior to a potential counteroffensive. There's been a lot of talk that this is the kind of area that you would have a counteroffensive. I've talked previously how it could be wise for the Ukrainians to try and cut the land bridge by, I don't know, doing attack down maybe through Polhi, Tokmak, some down here somewhere, or even towards Mariupol, maybe from Vuhledar itself, and it cuts off this whole area here from being able to be supplied from this land bridge, and it means that everything has to come over the Kerch Bridge and up through Crimea. But then if you manage to be able to somehow take out the Kerch Bridge, maybe if you get down to the coast near Berdyansk, then you can take out the Kerch Bridge. Then it effectively cuts off this entire area from being able to be supplied, and that's, or at least easily supplied, and that would be hugely beneficial. So I think, I think that kind of attack, an attack somewhere along here, would be one of the most sensible places for the Ukrainians to attack. Are we starting to see the very early aspects of this? I don't know. The ice, as I was saying, the Rebar seems to think that there's an uptick in intensity of attacks in that area. Despite the failures of the first day, they say the Ukrainian command continues to conduct sorties in various areas. Another unsuccessful attack on Russian positions was launched by the Ukrainians near Vasilivka. As a result of a brief battle, the enemy was repelled, losing more than 10 men and killed and wounded. If we go to the ISW, Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces attempted to attack positions near Novodanilivka and near Polohi. So just to let you know where they are, it's Orkhiv here. Novodanilivka is there south of Orkhiv. So towards here, I showed you that yesterday, the footage of that yesterday. So this will be referring to that attack. And then towards Polohi, not sure exactly where, but somewhere towards Polohi there. And then we hear the talk of Vasilivka. Let's go and find that. So we've got Polohi here. We've got Novodanilivka there, and then Vasilivka is here. I believe that's the Vasilivka they're talking about. But to that, I'm not sure exactly where that attack is coming from, whether it's amphibious, whether they are attacking through Kamyanska. I'm not really sure. But there is some talk about it, so let's go into that in the ISW. Russian sources claim that Russian forces repelled the Ukrainian assaults, destroyed up to 5 Ukrainian tanks and 2 armored vehicles, and wounded and killed Ukrainian personnel. Zaporizhzhia Oblast Occupation Deputy Vladimir Rogov characterized the Ukrainian assaults near Polohi as a reconnaissance in force operation. A prominent Russian mill blogger claimed on March the 16th that Ukrainian forces transitioned to positional fighting in the Hulaypole area following the alleged failed assaults in the Orkhiv and Polohi areas, and that Russian forces repelled a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group near Vasilivka. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces continued assaults in the Polyhi area. So there is quite a bit of activity going on around here, considering it's been so quiet for an awful long time. Those are three places there, and towards Polyhi. So that's along the line. It could, if it's reconnaissance and force, are we looking at the very early stages of preparing for a and executing a counteroffensive in this region? Now, there's not a lot to be said about Kherson. Nothing appears to be in the news. Much as hit on an ammunition depot in Mariupol overnight, or at least yesterday. Sorry, probably other hits in this region. I'm not aware of them at the moment. I guess that they take place on a daily basis. Thanks again. Please like, subscribe, and share. Toodle pips, and I'll catch you later for a Ukraine war update extra.